Okay, so Ashes of Creation Phase 1 testing is done, and reviews for the test are flying in. Narc's video is probably one of the most prominent. His critiques are sharp, his passion is clear, and his voice matters in this community. But here's where we need to pump the brakes a little bit. A lot of what Narc criticized wasn't even the focus for Phase 1. Phase 1 wasn't about the story arcs, mid-game biomes, or polished systems. It was about testing the foundations, server performance, combat basics, and, basic node progression. If those things don't work, the rest doesn't matter. That's the reality of alpha testing. And yet, players, Narc included, seem to forget that sometimes. Yes, placeholders are boring. Yes, empty zones feel incomplete. And that's because they are incomplete. Judging Phase 1 for missing features is like reviewing a car's handling and responsiveness while it's still in the factory. So today, we're breaking down his review. We'll go over where Narc's critiques hit the mark and where they didn't, and why understanding what Phase 1 set out to accomplish is so important for managing expectations when we move on to the Phase 2 test in 3 days as I write this. Let's start with the valid stuff, because Narc wasn't wrong about everything. Server stability is a mess. The lag disconnects and rubber banding during stress tests made it feel like the servers were held together with chewing gum and hope, and that's fine. Stress testing is supposed to break things. Intrepid needed to find these cracks early so they can fix them before the game scales up. And today, they started an extra stress test to prepare for the 20th. It's supposed to go until Thursday, but I honestly don't really know all of the details. I just know that I was able to jump in and get to like level 6 or something. Combat and gameplay mechanics were functional, but stiff. Narc called out how combat doesn't feel impactful or exciting yet, and he's right. Without structured encounters to push the system to its limits, combat feels like a test dummy version of what it could be. But of course, that's exactly what stage we're in. Bare mechanics, being tested, not polished. Then there's the node system. Narc pointed out the grind of material sinks, calling it tedious, but honestly, I agree. Watching nodes creep towards the next tier felt like watching grass grow. But tedious or not, this was important to test. Nodes worked. Players came together to upgrade them within a matter of days. Resources were gathered and the system proved it had potential, or has potential. So yes, Phase 1 had issues, but those issues are exactly what needed to surface. That is what testing is for. Find the problems, expose the limits, and refine the foundation. Now, let's shift to the critiques that weren't relevant. Starting with the vassal system. Narc's frustration with its absence makes sense. The system is part of the, underlying the rest of the node system, which is a major selling point for Ashes. But expecting it in Phase 1 was just unrealistic. The vassal system builds on node progression, which was still being stress tested. Without stable nodes, introducing vassal mechanics would have been pointless. According to Intrepid's roadmap, the vassal system was set for Phase 2 testing anyway, where nodes and their economic relationships would get more depth. Phase 1 was, of course, about testing the node leveling and resource management, and how everything worked together at the basic level. Now that we've worked through Phase 1, I imagine that the system is pretty stable and we'll see how the vassal system mechanics do when they're stacked on top of it. Then, the lack of compelling story content. And I kind of really want you to think about this one. Complaining about story and quest line in a network test. Quests in Phase 1 were dull, repetitive, and utterly uninspired. Because they were placeholders, and anyone who expected more was setting themselves up for disappointment. Of course, the quests are boring. Not only are they starter quests, they're incomplete by design. Phase 1 wasn't about story arcs or narrative depth. Those systems rely on mechanics that are still being built. Story arcs, dungeons, and dynamic events are meant to emerge from nodes, sieges, and player actions. Without the underlying systems, there's no meaningful context for storytelling. Now, Intrepid did mention story arcs for regions like the Riverlands and Sandsquall Desert back in August, and I'll be honest, I'm skeptical. Plans shift, and that update was 6 months ago. Until we see Phase 2 roll out, I'll take those promises with a grain of salt. So yes, the quests were bad, but placeholder content in an alpha test shouldn't shock anyone. It should be expected. Complaining about unfinished storytelling now is like getting mad at a sandbox for not having castles. It comes later when the systems are ready to support it. Crafting was another easy target in his review, and fair enough, the artisan system feels painfully basic. Gathering is repetitive, and crafting stations offer little beyond the bare minimum. But again, this stage of testing wasn't about crafting depth. It was about testing the framework, like everything else. Resource gathering, processing stations, and basic item creation. Advanced systems like artisan skill trees and, hopefully, in my case, animal breeding are coming in Phase 2. Those are the tools that will transform crafting into something extremely rewarding. That doesn't mean players can't ask for more during Phase 1 and provide feedback for what they want to see in it, or see in Phase 2. Even in its early stages, crafting needs something to keep players engaged. Progression, variety, anything really. But right now it's a foundation test. Expecting more than that is something that children or people with no common sense would do. And then finally, we can talk about biomes. Narc called out the emptiness of the desert and tropical zones, and at first glance, he's got a point. Those areas feel barren with little to fight and even less to do. But that's because players aren't even supposed to be there yet. The desert and the tropics are level 25 to 30 zones. They have monsters that are that level, far beyond what Phase 1 players could handle. At least without decent gear and a group that wants to go and farm those things for no reason. Right now, players cluster around the starting areas, leveling up and testing the nodes closest to them. When the new zones come online, players will naturally spread out with their guilds to claim those nodes in the harder areas. That's the way progression is designed to work. Move up, move out, and challenge tougher zones when you're ready. It's important to remember that Ashes of Creation isn't trying to be a traditional MMO with static zones that exist for the sake of existing. These biomes are placeholders right now, but when they're complete, they're going to serve a purpose. Nodes, dungeons, and resource competition will turn empty landscapes into meaningful regions, filled with opportunities for players to fight, gather, and claim territory. Dropping all of that content into the game right now, before the systems like resource management, sieges, and nodes are stable, would not make sense. And here's the part that people often forget. Testing empty zones is part of testing. These barren spaces allow Intrepid to experiment with spawns, environmental balance, and player density without cluttering the map with incomplete content. If they rush to fill the tropics and deserts now, the result will be shallow and half-baked. It'd just be features for the sake of features, not systems that work together to make a living world. So are the empty biomes exciting? No. Should they be? Also no. The purpose will come later, once players are ready to push into them, and Intrepid has the systems in place to make those zones meaningful and fun. Until then, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do, waiting for the world to grow into them. Again, Narc's review was passionate, sharp, and thoughtful. He raised valid concerns about Phase 1 systems, server issues, combat, and the node grind, and those critiques are worth listening to. But the frustration over missing features like vassal systems, story arcs, and biomes, he's kinda just wasting everyone's time, including his own. Phase 1 was about testing the foundation. If at a base level the servers don't work, if combat doesn't function, if nodes don't progress, none of the other shiny features matter. Alpha testing is clearly messy, incomplete, and at times frustrating, but that's what we signed up for. Looking ahead to Phase 2, we'll see the systems that players are waiting for. Deeper crafting, vassal mechanics, and more dynamic zones. Until then, the best we can do as testers is focus on what's here, and not what isn't, and provide our feedback so that future is successful. The game isn't ready yet, and not only is that okay, it's obvious. It's being built piece by piece, by piece, and every placeholder and every bug we find is progress. Judging an alpha like it's a finished product is a rookie creator mistake, and players should take another look when videos pop up with poorly thought out arguments fed to you by creators foaming at the mouth for clicks. That's all for today. You're welcome.